Well, hi, everybody. I am Rhonda Lee Chapman. I'm the host of People, Nature, Big Ideas. And this month, we're going to be talking about something quite different from what we usually do, and that is hunting. We're going to be digging into these topics with Kang Yang, who is the co-founder of Mentored Hunting and Fishing. And we're going to be talking with Nick Banks as well. And he is with TPL. He's one of our program managers up in the Minnesota Northwoods office. So welcome, Kang. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks, Rhonda. Thanks for having us.
I would love for you to share this idea about the Mentored Hunting and Fishing project, where the idea came from, what it is, who it's for. And then, Nick, I also would love for you to talk about why you took an interest in it and what it means for TPL, what it means for your program in particular. I love this project.
Definitely. So when I started hunting, I had this like aha moment, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, now I want people to experience this with me as well. And so that's why I got into starting programs and, helping with mentored hunts, helping be a mentor as well. Being mentor, I held myself highly to that title, just because mentor isn't about just killing something, but, teaching them things that you do, right? Passing along your own traditions and skills and stuff like that. This mentored hunt and fishing program really wouldn't have started if it wasn't for Nick, because Nick reached out. Nick saw me. I was speaking at Pheasants Forever. Every year they have a pheasant fest, and Nick, reached out. And to deviate a little bit, one of the misconceptions I think with hunting is that it's a white male dominated community, right? And while that may be true, I feel like on the outer level, but if you look inside, it's very diverse. You just have to find those communities that aren't speaking up as much, right? And that's why when I started hunting, I was like, where's my community at? Like, where Hmong people, like the Hmong people in Minnesota have such a rich hunting community. Why is no one speaking on these larger platforms, speaking like that? And I was like, is this a white male dominated industry? Is it inclusive at all? And what I found was that it's very inclusive from my experience, right? Some people's may be different, but from my experience, it's been very inclusive and very welcoming. And again, this mentored hunt program would have started without Nick reaching out. Nick was like, I love what you do. Maybe we should put something on together. And I'm like, yes, let's do it. You know what I mean? Especially with the support from TPL and also backcountry hunters and anglers were like, we can do it. So that's how I kind of started. And the goal is to really not just show them hunting, but to make them a hunter. I designed it on how my own experience is through hunting, right? When I first started hunting, like what were my challenges? What did people not tell me, right? What kind of gatekeeping interactions did I face that I can break down through this mentored hunt program, right? So one of them, for example, would be sharing spots, right? Hunters, they're very, very, very secretive of their spots where they can kill and harvest an animal. And for me, it's like, you don't have to give up your secret spots, but you could give them, the borders of the property and all that stuff. And so we designed it again to make them a hunter, to give them the skills and the knowledge where they can go after and replicate it themselves. And that's a big part of it being on public land, is that public land is there for everyone and they can access it by themselves. They don't have to go and ask a farmer for, permission. Public land is there, it's mapped, it's easy to access. We really focused that part as well, is the public land piece.
Thank you. And I'm going to make sure that I'm capturing this, and I might add a little bit to it.
Sure.
So there's this mentored hunting and fishing program, and it came about because you were speaking as a person from the Laos generation, Laos heritage in Minnesota, Hmong heritage. Thank you.
Yep.
And so in Minnesota, there's a very large Hmong community, and you're speaking at this event, and Nick sees you and he hears what you're talking about, and he says, "This is it. This is the thing that we need to be more, that we need more of this," right?
Yeah.
And as you're thinking about this mentorship, you're thinking about not only building your community, but who else that's not from the Hmong community, that isn't represented on these stages. How else can they come into the fold? How else can they be represented? How can I create this mentor mentee dynamic for this particular or these particular segments of the broader population, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so, Nick, you're at this event. Kang is talking and he's telling this really cool story. What came up for you?
I said, "This is the guy. This is the guy right here."
He said,
Um,
let's take a shot.
yeah. So, and kudos to Kane for like fielding this request of mine coming out of left field because I just contacted him out of the blue. I think there might have been an article in our local paper, the Star Tribune, leading up to Pheasant Fest where Kane was speaking. So that's where I heard his story about his father and his dog Kaya and getting into hunting that way, and that was. That resonated with me. But then leading up to this, to give some context, I've been struggling with, this is my TPL work hat on, like how do I meet our one of our organizational core commitments to making outdoor spaces more equitable and diverse. So this is going on in my head. I'm struggling with this. Like, how can I do this as a primarily doing land protection work? How do I make these spaces more equitable and diverse? And so I was looking at Kane, thinking about his experience, and saw that as maybe a way for me to help with the work that I'm doing answer that question. And the same thing is going through Kane's mind, as we found out, as we're talking to one another and getting to know one another better. And the Kane's network, because he's a very outgoing and engaging guy, made this concept that both of us had, this kind of the shared vision, a realization. Because what I think is like fundamental about this program that is maybe a bit unique from others is it's not just about participants, like the mentees being from communities of color, underrepresented communities, but it's the mentors that are, because representation matters. And
Mhm.
so that was crucial. And Kane, has these connections to pull in such a diverse group of mentors that pulled us off. And that's been, I think, what's been a lot of the success behind the program to date. That's
Yeah.
kind of what was going through my head in a nutshell.
No,
Yeah.
that's great. We all have very, very active minds, and I'm
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for it. And I love hearing how the dots started to be connected. You're looking at mission alignment, you're looking at impact, you're looking at ways to actually build that collective community. It's very hard to have, you don't have collective community when something is singularly focused on one segment of our population. And you all are now widening our aperture so that we can have a more full picture of what's real out here in these spaces and what the opportunities might be. And that kind of gets me excited. We are bringing mentors and mentees together that are racially and ethnically mixed and various age generations, geographies coming together. Yeah. We've got different status of, we've got some members of the immigrant community that are joining. And so here's the spoiler for the audience. I'm going to be part of the next cohort in the Mentored Hunting and Fishing Project. And we're coming up on a camping event in October. And so by the time this podcast episode drops, I think we will have finished with our hunting experience. And so that means I'm traveling to Minnesota. We're going to be going to the headwaters of the Mississippi. We're going grouse hunting with a cohort of a handful of mentors, some of whom I think are women, if I'm not mistaken, which is also something that's really important to call out. I think we've got something like 12 mentees or so. Is that about right?
Yep.
And as a little bit of a twist to this, my producer, Tom, is going to be coming along to this incredible weekend in October. He's going to bring his camera. He's going to be capturing our experience. We're going to have him make a little film about it. And so I'm nervous for sure, for a whole host of reasons, including being on film where there's going to be evidence of how well I do and perhaps don't do. So for me, the journey and part of the reason why I'm a little bit nervous is it's a commitment, right? And for me, the journey actually began with even submitting the application. Nick told me about this opportunity. And I thought, why should I do this? And then I thought, I know exactly why I should do this. This makes all the sense in the world. And so I applied like everybody else. I applied to participate, which is really what equity looks like. So I was really grateful that it wasn't just an assumption. I appreciate that I was treated the same as everybody else, not special because I work at TPL. And I underwent an interview with you two, which I also appreciated. And I was nervous about that as well. And since that time, I've been doing my best to attend the weekly online lessons. And when I haven't been able to attend because of other conflicts with my schedule, I did my homework over the weekends. I've had a chance to like virtually meet with the other folks. And I'm excited because In just a few weeks, I've already witnessed some really rich conversations that have been happening around the origin story of conservation, which Nick just touched on very briefly, and we don't have time for today, but representation in the outdoors, the ethics of hunting, who owns the land, what does public land mean? I mean, these really rich conversations, and we haven't even gotten together in person yet. So
Mhm.
I'm curious, when we think about this upcoming hunting trip, what are your hopes for that weekend? And maybe you can walk us through, like the audience, through what it's going to look like, the few days that we'll be together, so the listeners can really get a sense of what this adventure looks like. I think our first stop is going to be at the gun range,
Yep.
right? With me and just a couple of other people. Like, what are we going to do?
Yeah. And Nick, feel free to chime in too. But like, yeah, so the weekend, we're gonna start at the gun range, get you guys comfortable and familiar around firearms, right? That's number one thing. Safety is always number one with us, and when you're dealing with live firearms, you guys are going through online course about hunter safety, and then we'll also reiterate it through an in-person interaction, right? And so we're gonna go to the gun range, and then from there, we can take you guys to buy your first licenses, which I'm excited about. Your first hunting license that makes you a direct contributor to conservation. And then we're going to go up to grouse camp, do some grouse hunting. And I structured the program, or me and Nick structured the program to where we're taking all the coursework and doing that before the actual event, right? Because, for me, what I want people to get most of the weekend event is first be empowered, right? I want everyone to feel empowered, feel like, they belong. And also, secondly, is to find community, right, with each other, meeting everyone, instead of us spending time in class and talking about me and Nick just talking in front of the room at the event, we giving you guys time to interact with each other, hang out. It's really just a grouse camp. And lastly, the third thing is, I want you guys to hopefully love it and build on tradition, right? Make it a tradition going to grouse camp every year with somebody from the weekend or bringing your own friends along, right? You being a mentor next year and bringing a friend along and then teaching them, you know what I mean? And so those three things, it's, being empowered, finding community, and building tradition.
I imagine that both of you have run into a lot of misconceptions about who hunters are. I would like for you all to talk to us a little bit about some of the common misconceptions about hunters and the practice of hunting. I know, as a person of color, as a Black woman in particular, I have a varying levels of comfort when I go out into spaces that are less populated. I don't always feel that safe. Nevertheless, can you talk to us about the misconceptions that you've all experienced and the things that you've had to defend as hunters?
Yeah, I guess
You can go ahead
Nick,
and
you want
start
to
off,
start?
Ken. Yeah.
Yeah, I was one of those people who never started hunting until I was 27, and I was one of those people who had those misconceptions of hunters, right? Like, they're people who only take from the landscape; they don't give back, right? They're out there to kill everything. There's no conservation in that at all. And so, when I started hunting, I realized that hunters are one of the biggest contributors to conservation, and also one of the biggest groups that understand the landscape and the animals on that landscape, right? Because land is so limited, right? God's not making any more land. And so we have to protect what we have and what we have and what we have access to. And so hunters, while they may take a deer out of the landscape, they're also looking at how do they keep deer on that landscape, right? So they're, by following, through science-based research, right? They're figuring out, well, how much deer the land can hold, right? It's intentional harvesting. Like, that's why I want a lot of people to get into hunting, is because it's a whole different realm. So yeah, that was one misconception.
Yeah, thank you. You really said something to my soul there. All of these years that I have been engaging with, been in relationship with, been, advocating for land, whatever a person's kind of perception is of creation, this whole notion, this truth that we're not getting any more land.
Yeah.
And so, like, protecting it, but just the way you said God's not making any more land really, really struck me. So I just want to thank you for that.
Yeah.
I had to write that down. Nick, misconceptions. What have you been hearing and what have you been defending or protecting and informing people on?
Well, I agree with a lot, those same things, the misconceptions that Kane was pointing to. I think like I would call it like this combating the trophy mentality. And Kane was kind of touching on this, like that hunters are only out there to get the biggest animal or the most animals. And hunters sometimes don't do themselves any favors, especially in this day and age with social media posting the grip and grin photo online and everyone sees you, like so this gets kind of, I think, into some of the ethics of, hunting too. The vast majority of hunters are not in it for those reasons at all. My experience has been that, to what Kane was saying, is that they're ardent conservationists. They care deeply about the places where they go to hunt, and that manifests it's in a lot of different ways, either through advocacy or dollars spent on conservation, etc. So I think that's the biggest misconception. And then also that it's just about the harvest or the kill, which it isn't. I already talked about that a little bit, and Kane did too. It's about the relationship and the experience, so much more than just that. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that's nuanced and different for each hunter, because hunters are people and people are different, and so it's going to be different for each individual person in terms of how they approach that. So I think those are the two biggest things I notice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's another layer to this that's kind of a little more political, and around land conservation and protecting our various wildlife resources and the like. It can be confusing to think of hunting as a way to conserve land, as a way to protect species, right? Because it's like, well, how are you protecting anything if you are taking its life away? And there's this interesting kind of dynamic where, and Kang, you also mentioned that you used to really enjoy bird watching. So if you've got somebody who is out as a bird watcher, they're calculating and tracking, the different species of birds. They're looking at the impacts of climate change that are having a direct impact on the migratory patterns of birds. And they come back with these amazing numbers. And we use that number to have different laws passed to protect them, to protect the birds. And so some people might say, well, the birders are part of, nature's frontline community. They are the ones that are doing good work, and they're going to be on Capitol Hill fighting for the protection of this particular species of creature. And so when we think about hunting, the hunting community being frontline responders on behalf of landscapes and conservation, it's just not always that clear. But would you think about hunters as a frontline responder on behalf of land conservation and protection? Does that make sense to you?
For example, let's say I go duck hunting, right? And I go to one of my favorite spots, right? That could be someone's favorite spot to go bird watching, right? Same thing, you know what I mean? And I go there and there's no ducks, right? And so I ask myself, now, why are there no ducks here? So I'm looking at the water, looking at the vegetation. I'm experiencing it firsthand, why there's no ducks, right? And so that then gives me information, and having a voice, I can then speak to, our Department of Natural Resources, figuring out what's going on. I think hunters, they're seeing, touching, smelling the land, and they're there in the mindset of what the animal is as well, right? So, and not just that, but like money-wise, there's a federal duck stamp, right? So duck hunters, every year when they duck hunt, they have to buy a duck stamp. It's $25, and those dollars go directly towards protecting ducks across all the migratory pathways. And do birders buy those duck stamps? I'm sure some of them do, but most of them may not know about what a duck stamp is, right? And those duck stamps directly affect them as well, because it puts ducks on the landscape for them to see as well. And so I think it's not one's better than the other. It's like, how can we understand each other better, and be first responders together, right? Because when we come together, that's how we can make change. Right?
I do want to clarify. So a duck stamp is not something you put on a letter. What's a duck stamp? I have no idea what that is.
I actually have one right here. Hold on. So a duck stamp, it's every year. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they come out with a duck stamp, and it's $25. And you see if they still show. There you go.
Oh, it is a stamp.
Yeah, it is an actual stamp.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you could use it. I think you could use it on a letter, right? But I wouldn't. It's $25. So it's one of those things that if you hunt, you keep them, a collection of them now. I have 8 of them throughout the 8 years I've duck hunted, and it's just a growing thing. So
awesome.
And I always buy 2 because you gotta sign across the duck stamp to keep it valid. And I was like, I don't want to keep a collection of my signed. I want to keep a collection of my signed one and also some pristine stamps. So I'm buying $50 in stamps every year, and that
and that goes to the collective good of the whole effort. I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. What about you, Nick? Frontline responders as hunters, or vice versa?
Kane touched on the duck stamp, and there's also the Pittman-Robertson Act, which is a federal excise tax on hunting equipment. So that generates money through every gun or ammunition that you purchase. Hunters in Minnesota, in particular, were a big group that came out and helped to support and pass the Legacy Amendment in Minnesota, which was passed in 2008. And that was a constitutional amendment that dedicated funds to restore, protect, and enhance wetlands, prairies, and habitat for game, fish, and wildlife across Minnesota. And that generates $130 million a year. And that's done it for the last 15 years in Minnesota. That goes towards protection and restoration of natural spaces. So, and also with what Kane was saying about coming together, I agree with that completely, because I see hunters continuing to play that frontline role, but they got to do it with the recognition that conservation and land protection falls under this big tent. So I think it's incumbent on hunters that we come together, that we look for opportunities to work with non-hunting based groups towards, the common goals that helps us achieve a shared vision for everyone.
I know for you, Kang, the mentored hunting and fishing, you're trying to introduce new generations and new racial and ethnic demographics into this experience, which we'll get into in a few minutes. But you also mentioned in a previous conversation that your dad was an influence. And my point here is about the connection with family. A lot of people, that's what tradition is. That's what family culture is. We have practices and we pass them down from one generation to the next, both good and bad, right? But in this instance, we're talking about this tradition of hunting. And you mentioned that your dad had an influence on you and your interest in, and maybe in a way you didn't really anticipate. So can you share with us a little bit about your dad and where he came from and how that ended up being an intersection for where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. So my dad, both my parents are from Laos. So they're immigrants. They came here right after the Vietnam War as immigrants. Yeah, with him, he's always hunted since he could walk and anything. And for him, it was like hunting for sustenance, right? In Laos, because he lived in villages in the mountains of Laos and stuff like that. And so when he came here, he brought back those him and my uncles brought back those hunting traditions with him, right? And they've always hunted ever since I can remember. I remember them just bring home game and teasing me about it, and they're like, "Oh, we shot Santa's reindeer," or he wasn't. And then growing up, I think that's what maybe kind of pushed me away from hunting, is just seeing this animal here, right? And it's like, I don't want to do that, so I never picked up hunting until I was 27, so 8 years ago. And again, like Nick, I got into it because of my dog, right? So I've always loved animals, loved being outdoors. I used to be a big bird watcher, loved bird watching. And when I got a dog, I was like, how can I give my dog the best, meaningful, fulfilling life? And the thing she was born to do is to hunt. So that's how we got into hunting. And from that, I remember watching YouTube and seeing how people hunt, and my dad would tell me, "Oh, that's nothing like how we hunt. That's the wrong way to do it." And I was like, "Whatever, Dad, you don't know what you're doing." And I remember going out in the field with him, and he's like, "Yeah, we're not gonna be walking in a line for pheasants, right? You go that way and I go this way, and just shoot straight and come back to the car, right?" And it was a whole different experience. And I had lots of doubts with him. And after hunting together multiple times, I've learned so much from him, right? And he's taught me so much into how he hunts, how he and my uncles used to always hunt. And it's just brought us a lot closer together for sure. But I remember him telling me "Yeah, I can trust you now because you actually shoot birds and bring back birds." Before, I couldn't bring anything back. I missed all the birds, or I never hunted, right? And then when I did hunt, I missed a lot of birds, and he never trusted me. But now it's when I give input, he values my input now, you know what I mean? And vice versa. So that's the kind of trust and better relationship we've got into.
as a way to start wrapping up the conversation, again, I'm super grateful to both of you. I'm wondering if either of you have an experience you can share with us that was especially meaningful for you, either as a hunter or just as a person being outside in nature. There are all of these moments that happen throughout our lives that I often refer to as a spark. And I'm curious if you could share a story that was just like that moment where you just said, wow, this is really incredible. I would like to go out on a note like that.
Yeah, I think back to one of my duck hunts. I've always watched ducks. Anyways, I was duck hunting and I remember sitting in this slough. It was wet, it was dirty, it was early morning, you can't really see anything yet. And all of a sudden I hear this, like, it sounds like a jet engine coming above my head. I'm like, is that an airplane? What is that? And I look up and you could just see this group of like 200 diver ducks. And I've never seen diver ducks do this before, but they were coming down like from the heavens, really, and swooping down onto the water to land. And it was just so amazing. Like, I was like, I would have never experienced this. I felt like as a bird watcher, right? I feel like I only got to experience it because I was in the moment with the animals, right? And that really lit up something in me. I was like, I want to experience this again. I want other people to experience this, and that was one thing, like, hunting wise, that was meaningful to me. And I'll kind of share a second story of what was meaningful, like, socially to me. Again, going back to like the hunting community being this white male dominated industry, right? And also just the perceptions of being a person of color and not belonging in this community, right? I had those doubts as well. And I remember I was like, gosh, I really want to goose hunt on a field, like goose hunt on a cornfield and do the whole goose hunting, do it myself, And I was like, the only way to do that is if I ask a farmer, right, for permission to hunt on their property. And I remember telling myself, like, gosh, what, I'm Asian, maybe they're always going to say no. No one's going to want to say yes to hunting on their land, right? And one day I was sitting in my bed at like 2 a.m. and I was like, screw it. Like, the worst they could say is no. Like, I need to get all these perceptions or whatever out of my head and just go ask. And I remember asking this farmer and he said, oh yeah, like, come and hunt. You know what I mean? Like, there's lots of geese out here. And, it was just like, wow, like, so welcoming, you know what I mean? Like, these people, and it was in a rural area, you know what I mean? It wasn't in the inner city at all. And it was just like, there's a lot of good people out there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I like that you had the courage to do it. And I like that you got the result that I think we were all hoping for when you started that story. That makes me really happy.
Yeah.
Nick, what about you? What about a transformative moment that you had that really sticks with you?
Well, I think one that I'm recalling to mind happened just this summer on when we were out in the Bighorn Mountains. For me, what was meaningful about it was this experience that it was generational. It goes across generations in my family. And there's this real strong, at least for me, and I think for my kids too, and I know for my parents, there's this connection to land and place in the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming. And we were coming back from a trip in Montana, and we stopped and stayed in the Bighorn Mountains for a night and hiked up to an overlook that overlooks the South Fork of the Ton River, where I learned how to fly fish when I was a young kid. And we had hiked up to that same overlook all the time and walked down to fly fish the South Fork of the Ton River. And 4 or 5 years ago, we hiked up there with my kids. I've got 3 children, and we hiked up there and took a picture of them overlooking the valley where the South Fork of the Ton River is. And I loved that picture of them. That was from 5 years ago. And we hiked up there just that one night when we got in to camp again and recreated that picture. But we were in that same place. And that goes back to a place that I've shared with my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister. Then I've shared it with my wife and now with my kids. And it's just, that was a real meaningful and wonderful thing for me. And that's public land too. That's the other thing that's cool about this, is that place hopefully will be there in perpetuity for others to have, an experience that's meaningful like that for them.
I love that. That's really beautiful. That's really beautiful. These opportunities that we have to document our families and our experiences, the way it wasn't as easy, years ago to keep these images kind of stored. And to have something to reflect on for all of us to kind of keep talking through. And sometimes they're just the things that live in our mind and our hearts, and that's okay too. But it's nice when you have some sort of representation of it, like photographically. I love that. It sounds very beautiful. Well, thank you. I'm super grateful to you both. Again, I know that I asked you to give a lot of time. And so I'd like to thank you, Kang Yang from Mentored Hunting and Fishing. And I'd like to thank you, Nick Banks, your TPL Program Manager from the Minnesota Northwoods audience. This was a really good conversation, and I'm excited that we're going to continue to build over it over the coming weeks. And I'm excited to see you in October. I'm excited to be humbled. I think it's probably something I could use a good dose of. And for the rest of you who are listening, this is People, Nature, Big Ideas. It's produced by the Trust for Public Land in partnership with Pretty Good Productions. Our executive producer is Thomas Clayton Miller. Our producer is Vanessa Martin, and our associate producer is Alyssa Morley. Our theme song is produced by Tall Black Guide Productions. And if you like the show, please leave us a rating on iTunes. Maybe mention us to a friend or two. Thanks again for listening. And thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom, for being the great producer that you are. Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Kang. Just an honor to have your time.
Yeah, thank you, Rhonda.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
That's all, folks. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you the next time.